Julius Caesar, Act 1, Scene 2. We should totally just stab Caesar. This act begins with Cassius trying to convince Brutus to join in the conspiracy in which they will stab Caesar. This begins with a metaphor in which Cassius compares Caesar to a giant due to his oppressive nature. This argument is pure pathos as Cassius begins, "Why, man, doth he bestride the narrow world like a colossus, while we petty men walk under his huge legs and peep about to find ourselves dishonorable graves." The imagery of Caesar walking around and Cassius and Brutus peeping about under his legs creates the feeling of despair, which ultimately leads Brutus to first consider Cassius's argument. Cassius throws the word dishonorable and graves. In this case, this would be the most offensive part of anybody's life or death, since dishonorable is the worst thing anybody could be in the Roman society. In this case, their grave would probably be sitting with Janus and Damien and all the art freaks. Cassius often repeats the word men in order to introduce the universality of the word. Though Caesar is a giant, he's still a man. He's still able to be killed. That Rome is made out of men. This is pathos to make Brutus consider his own sin. Cassius begins, "Men at some time are masters of their fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are the underlings." Now, of course, Cassius isn't talking about celebrities or about the beauty falls within them. Instead, he's saying, we can take control of our fate. And this is ethos when he says ourselves or our stars. It's also pathos because it makes Brutus really realize what he's doing by being idle is wrong. So then Cassius starts to get real. He starts to use parallel structure to ask questions in order to invoke a sense of pride within Brutus. Cassius says, "Brutus and Caesar? Why should that name be sounded any more than yours?" He uses logos as he presents his first arguments. Writes them together. "Yours is a fair name." And then he starts to use metaphors. "Sound them, it doth become the mouth as well." The third and last metaphor is used to secure Brutus's sense of esteem in Rome. Cassius says, "Wear them. It is just as heavy." And then he goes into pathos again. He says, "Brutus will start a spirit just as soon as Caesar." And this is kind of imagery, or pathos. It makes you think of Romans screaming Brutus's name. "Yay, Brutus, for killing Caesar. We're no longer under a dictatorship." And you start to realize the reason Cassius has mentioned all this talk of names and repeated it so much is because he's comparing Brutus to a god indirectly. When he says, well, and I'm pretty sure that in Mean Girls they thought they were all gods, so I just used them. "Now, in the names of all the gods at once." So last, he goes back to that whole motif of giants and paints Caesar as kind of carnivorous and inhuman. "On what meat doth this our Caesar feed, that he is so great?" So basically he's saying, oh my god, how did we let this happen when we're like totally better people? And then he kind of gives us an ultimatum with our good old pathos. He says, "Age, thou art shamed," which makes Brutus say, oh my god, if I don't do this, I'm gonna be shamed forever. Shut up. And so, with all this repetition and metaphor and shaming and pathos, Cassius eventually gets Brutus to conspire, and thus begins to play. Cool. Actually, I'm pretty sure if Regina George saw this, she would say, "I love your project. How do you make it?" Because she'd hate it.